What do Dana have that I don't have?
She stood in the doorway of her own wedding reception, laughing at something her new husband whispered in her ear, completely unaware that 12 feet away, at the edge of the dance floor, her best friend was quietly handing her business plan to a stranger with a checkbook. Nobody warned her, nobody stopped it. The band kept playing, the champagne kept pouring, and somewhere between the toasts and the cake cutting, the future she had spent 6 years building in secret slipped out of her hands and into someone else's name. She wouldn't understand what happened that night for almost 2 years. By the time she did, the company built from her ideas was worth $40 million, and the woman standing beside her at the altar of her own wedding had already erased her from the story completely. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and before that night, she believed she had exactly 2 things in this world she could trust without question. One was the man she was marrying. The other was the woman she had called her best friend since they were 19 years old. Roommates in a cramped dorm room, splitting instant noodles and whispering about the lives they were going to build for themselves one day. Her name was Renee Callahan, and for over a decade she had been the person Dana turned to first, with every idea, every fear, every fragile dream she hadn't yet found the courage to say out loud to anyone else, which is exactly why Renee was the only person Dana ever let read the notebook. That notebook held 6 years of Dana's life. Late nights after her nursing shifts, ingredient lists scratched out and rewritten a dozen times, sketches of packaging drawn on napkins, a business plan built one exhausted evening at a time by a woman who had no formal training in business, no investors, and no safety net. Only a stubborn belief that the skincare formula she had developed for her own condition could help thousands of women who felt as unseen as she once did. She kept that notebook in a drawer for years, too afraid to show it to anyone who might laugh at her for dreaming that big. Renee never laughed. Renee told her it was brilliant. Renee told her she just needed the right person to hear it. At the reception, that right person happened to be standing near the bar. His name was Preston Cade, an investor who had known Dana's new husband for years and had been invited almost as an afterthought. Dana had planned, quietly, nervously, to find 5 minutes with him herself before the night ended, folder in hand, heart pounding, certain this was finally her moment. She asked Renee, her maid of honor, to hold on to that folder while she greeted her guests. It seemed like nothing. It seemed like the kind of small favor best friends do for each other on the happiest day of their lives. It would turn out to be the most expensive 5 minutes of Dana's entire life. What exactly was said at that bar, nobody but Renee and Preston will ever know for certain. What we do know is this. Within 18 months, a skincare company launched under a name strikingly close to the one scrawled inside Dana's notebook, funded by Preston Cade, founded, according to every public record, by Renee Callahan. Dana wasn't invited to the launch. Dana wasn't mentioned in a single press release. Dana, in fact, didn't even know the company existed until a friend sent her a congratulatory text meant for someone else entirely. 3 words that would end up unraveling everything she thought she knew about the person she trusted most in this world. Before we go any further into exactly how this betrayal was carried out and exactly how Dana eventually uncovered the truth, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What makes this story so difficult to sit with isn't just the money, though $40 million is not a small number to lose to someone who once called herself family. It's the years of trust, the years of shared secrets, the years Dana spent believing that loyalty this deep couldn't be faked. Somewhere inside that friendship, long before the wedding, long before the folder ever left Dana's hands, a decision had already been made by someone she loved. The question this story asks isn't only who stole what. It's how long you can know someone, sleep beside their secrets, celebrate their victories as your own, and still, when the opportunity presents itself, choose yourself completely. By the end of this story, you'll understand exactly how Renee pulled it off, the paperwork that protected her, the moment Dana finally found proof buried in a storage unit she almost didn't open, and what happened the day Preston Cade learned the truth about the woman he had trusted with his money. You'll hear how Dana fought to reclaim not the company, but her own name, and whether justice, in the end, ever really found its way back to her. Stay with us, because what happened after that wedding reception is far more calculated and far more heartbreaking than anyone standing on that dance floor could have imagined. To understand how a woman could stand beside her best friend on her wedding day while quietly plotting to take everything from her, you have to go back further than the reception, further than the notebook, back to the very beginning of a friendship that looked, from the outside, like it was built to last forever. Dana and Renee met at 19, two broke college roommates from very different worlds. Dana came from a small working-class family, used to counting every dollar, used to hearing the word no. Renee came from more comfortable means, used to getting what she wanted, used to being told she was destined for something bigger. For years, that difference never seemed to matter. They were sisters by choice, inseparable through breakups, layoffs, family funerals, and every ordinary Tuesday in between. But somewhere along the way, the balance between them started to shift, quietly, without either of them naming it out loud. Dana, despite having less, kept building something real. She fell in love with Marcus, a steady, quietly ambitious man who adored her without condition. She poured herself into a business idea that grew more promising by the year. Renee, meanwhile, watched her own relationships fall apart one after another, watched career opportunities slip through her fingers, watched from the sidelines as the friend she once considered less fortunate began quietly assembling a life that looked, more and more, like the one Renee had always assumed would be hers first. She never said she was jealous. She didn't have to. Those closest to Renee at the time would later describe a woman who smiled through every one of Dana's milestones while privately keeping score. She was the first to compliment Dana's engagement ring and the first to mention, almost too casually, that Marcus had once flirted with her back in college, long before he and Dana ever met. She was the one who volunteered to help plan the wedding, who inserted herself into every conversation with Marcus's friends and family, who made a habit of showing up early to help him with small tasks Dana hadn't asked her to help with at all. At the time, everyone around them called it devotion. Looking back, several guests would later admit it felt like something else entirely, something none of them wanted to say out loud, while Dana was still glowing with happiness. What Renee wanted, it would later become clear, was never really about business at all. It was about proving to herself that she could still take whatever she decided belonged to her. Dana had the formula, the plan, the vision Renee herself never had the discipline to build. Dana also had Marcus, a devoted husband who looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. In Renee's mind, according to people who knew her well, Dana had simply collected too many good things in one lifetime, and somebody who worked that much harder than Renee ever had to didn't deserve to have all of it. That resentment didn't explode in a single moment. It waited, patiently, for the one night everyone's guard would finally be down. That night, of course, was the wedding, and Renee had quietly prepared for it on two fronts at once. While she positioned herself near Preston Cade with Dana's folder in hand, she was also positioning herself near Marcus throughout the entire evening, refilling his drink before he asked, lingering a beat too long during their maid of honor toast, resting a hand on his arm during photos in a way that made more than one guest exchange an uneasy glance. To the room, it looked like affection between old friends. To Renee, it was reconnaissance. She wasn't simply trying to take Dana's business that night. She was quietly testing how much of Dana's entire life she could still pull toward herself if she was patient enough and bold enough to try. Over the following months, Renee made herself indispensable to Marcus in small, deliberate ways, always careful to keep Dana too consumed with the growing confusion around her stolen business to notice what was happening closer to home. She would call Marcus under the guise of checking in on Dana, only to steer the conversation toward herself, her loneliness, her admiration for the life he had built. She reminded him, more than once, that she had known him first, long before Dana ever entered the picture. Marcus, loyal and largely unaware of the full scope of what Renee had already taken, initially saw nothing more than a stressed friend leaning on him during a hard season. It would take a long time, and one very specific night, for him to understand what Renee had actually been trying to build behind his wife's back. That specific night came almost a year into the business betrayal, during one of the darkest stretches of Dana's life. when she was still trying to piece together how a company so close to her own idea had launched without her. Renee showed up at Marcus's office late one evening, claiming she needed to talk to someone about Dana, about how worried she was for her, about how exhausted the whole situation had left everyone around her. What began as concern shifted, within minutes, into something else entirely. Renee told Marcus that she had always wondered what life would have looked like if she had met him first, that she didn't think Dana appreciated him the way she deserved to, that maybe, if things had gone differently, they could have built something extraordinary together instead. Marcus, to his credit, ended the conversation immediately, unsettled by what he had just heard from a woman his wife trusted completely. But it planted a seed of suspicion he couldn't shake, and it was that same unease that pushed him, weeks later, to start quietly reviewing old messages and financial records tied to the early days of Dana's business idea, the very records that would eventually crack the entire case wide open. In trying to protect his marriage from a woman who had just tried to take him too, Marcus stumbled onto the paper trail that would finally prove exactly what Renee had done to his wife's business almost 2 years earlier, sitting untouched in an old email thread neither of them had thought to look at until now. What Marcus found were fragments at first, forwarded emails between Renee and a branding consultant dated months before the wedding, timestamps that made no sense if the business had truly been Renee's idea from the beginning. He brought what he found to Dana carefully, gently, aware of how fragile she had become over the past year of confusion and self-doubt. Dana's first instinct was disbelief, then a kind of grief that felt almost physical, the realization that the person she trusted most in the world had been quietly building a second betrayal alongside the first one, targeting not just her livelihood, but her marriage. It was in that moment, sitting across from Marcus, with the printed emails between them, that Dana finally understood this had never been one impulsive night at a reception. It had been calculated from the very beginning. Armed with what Marcus had found, Dana began her own quiet investigation, driven now by something sharper than confusion, something closer to resolve. She reached out to old mutual friends who had attended the wedding, asking careful questions about what they remembered from that night. Several admitted, almost apologetically, that they had noticed Renee spending an unusual amount of time with Preston Cade near the bar, and separately, that they had noticed how often Renee gravitated toward Marcus throughout the evening. Piece by piece, a fuller picture began to form, one where a single night had been used to chip away at two different parts of Dana's life simultaneously, while Dana herself had been too consumed with being a bride to notice either one happening in real time. It was during this stretch of searching that Dana remembered the old storage unit outside of town, the one she had rented years earlier when she and Marcus first moved in together, filled with boxes she hadn't opened since. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she recalled packing an old backup notebook, a rougher, earlier draft of her business plan she had abandoned in favor of the polished version Renee later carried into that reception folder. She drove out on a Sunday afternoon, unsure of what she was even looking for, and found the notebook exactly where she remembered leaving it, dated and time-stamped years before Renee's company ever existed. Undeniable proof of authorship, sitting quietly in a cardboard box the whole time. With the notebook in hand and the emails Marcus had uncovered, Dana finally reached out to Preston Cade directly, requesting a meeting he almost declined, uncertain why the wife of an old friend needed to speak with him about a company he had already funded successfully. What began as a tense, guarded conversation shifted the moment Dana laid the original notebook on the table between them, alongside the dated emails proving Renee had reached out to branding consultants months before the wedding, using language lifted almost directly from Dana's own private notes. Preston sat in silence for a long time. He would later admit that the company's founding story had never fully added up to him, small inconsistencies he had chosen to overlook, because the product itself was performing well. But sitting across from the real creator changed something in him immediately. What followed was not a courtroom battle, though Dana's attorney did explore that path early on, and found the paperwork Renee had used, largely drafted with Preston's own legal team, was frustratingly ironclad, built specifically to protect the company's official founder from exactly this kind of claim. There would be no dramatic verdict, no public trial, no headline announcing Dana's legal victory. Instead, the reckoning happened quietly, in a boardroom, when Preston called a meeting with Renee and asked her, in front of two other board members, to explain the timeline of emails now sitting in front of all of them. Renee's composure, so carefully maintained for years, finally cracked in that room, though even then, she never fully admitted what she had done. In the end, Dana never got the company that carried her original idea into a $40 million valuation, and she never got a courtroom apology from the woman who once shared everything with her, including, it turned out, an attempt at her own marriage. What she got instead was something Preston offered quietly, almost as an act of conscience, funding to help Dana launch her own line under her own name, built from the very notebook that had sat forgotten in a storage unit for years. It wasn't justice in the way most people imagine it. No headline, no reversal of fortune large enough to erase what had been taken. It was simply Dana, finally standing in her own name again, building something no one could take credit for a second time. As for Renee, she remained at the company for a while longer, though those who worked closely with her say something shifted permanently after that boardroom meeting. An unspoken understanding among the people around her that the story she had told for years no longer fully held together. Marcus and Dana's marriage survived, though Dana has said in the years since that trust, once broken this completely by someone this close, never fully returns to what it once was. She still keeps the old notebook, not the polished one that was stolen, but the rough, early draft that saved her case, tucked safely somewhere Renee will never again have access to. What this story leaves behind isn't a simple villain and a simple victim, though it may feel that way on the surface. It's a harder question, one worth sitting with long after the video ends. How well do we really know the people closest to us? And how much of what looks like devotion is sometimes just patience, waiting for the right moment to take what it has quietly decided it deserves? Dana spent over a decade believing loyalty like Renee's was rare and unshakable. It took one wedding reception to prove otherwise, and years afterward to rebuild what was left. Would you have noticed the signs sooner than she did, sitting across from someone who spent that many years pretending to be happy for you? If this story affected you the way it affected us, let us know in the comments what stood out to you the most, and if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next story.